Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 13th City Council meeting. Roll call. Mr. Smith is absent. I would like to couple new policies, and so this year for 2020, and one of them is a reminder: please turn off or silence your cell phones for the duration of the meeting. Thank you very much. We have an invocation. Denise, would you please?
Mayor, City Council members, this is an honor. Thank you for having me. I'm going to be reading a prayer that they actually use over in Fort Fairfield. We pray for our country at all times, that all citizens are safe, healthy, and happy. We pray for wisdom for all those who guide and govern. Help this government body in every situation to know and to do the things that are right and just, with soundness of judgment in making vital decisions. We pray for the peacemakers, that the holy, life-giving spirit may ever dwell in their hearts, and the barriers of fear, suspicion, and hatred may fall. This we pray to the Holy Father. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
And
Oh, go ahead.
just a side note, I would be remiss to not say this. I'm a minister, and I just want to say I bless you. I bless you. I bless your lives. I bless your families. I bless you as a governing body. And I do pray that this community prospers. And I thank you for the work that you do. I honor you in the work that you do for this city. I know it's not easy, but we thank you.
Thank you.
So bless you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise,
You're
very
welcome.
much. Thank you. Item number 3, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Okay, procedural matter number 2, public forum. This year I'm going to implement the mayor will implement the policy that we will open the council meetings for public forum at the beginning of the meeting. After the public forum is over, public comment will cease and will not be allowed. So, number 4, public forum. Anybody wish to speak? Yes.
Hi, my name is John Rasmus. I'm here to represent Tri-State.
Would you mind, please, sir? Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. My name is John Rasmussen. I am the chair of the select board for the town of Perham. I am here to speak about the effect that the ambulance changes in ambulance contract are going to have a massive effect on our town. I don't know if the committee or the council here is fully aware that by taking this action of changing the rates immediately from $11.50 per person to $100 per person, really does, from the opinion of not just my town, but the other surrounding towns that are affected by this, you are holding our elders hostage for a ransom. And it is very unfortunate that you have decided to take this decision. I'm sad that you aren't going to allow public comment when we do discuss the ambulance service. The town of Perham is really not prepared to deal with this right now. If we're not even legally allowed to make this decision by the deadline that you've set by January 31st. For many years, this has been an item on the annual meeting warrant in order to raise this funds. There is no way that the selectmen can make this decision on their own. If you choose to pursue this, you are going to force us into a situation in which my residents do not receive may potentially not receive emergency services, and you are putting their lives on the line. I strongly suggest that you at least move this deadline until March 31st so that my town can be a part of this. There are other towns affected that have their annual town meeting at a later date than that. I am not specific not sure when those are scheduled, but I strongly recommend that you contact them as to when they are legally allowed to make this decision. Also, the $100, moving immediately to $100 is fiscally impractical for our town. If you were to break this up into smaller and smaller increments, my town has a chance to cope with this without having to search for alternative options. We are very pleased that the costs for ambulance service have not gone up very much for many years, and we understand that a large increase is necessary. But these small towns cannot cope with that. You are asking us to raise 1.5 mils in order to meet this cost in addition to what we're already paying. We cannot, the voters will not accept this. Please consider breaking into smaller increments. Let's raise it $10 a year. Let's raise it $20 a year. We might be able to swing that. But the way these options are written, there's no way that we can even legally make this decision. We're deeply concerned about a number of things with this decision-making process, including going to executive session in order to discuss these very specific cost analysis. What you are citing for in order for do executive session is 405. Let's see here. 405(6)(c), I believe. When you are citing this, you're only citing the last 25% of the statute and ignoring the first 3 quarters. I'm going to read this statute for you that you are quoting for your executive sessions. Discussion or consideration of the condition, acquisition, or the use of real or personal property primarily attached to real property or the interests therein, or disposition of publicly held property, or economic development only if premature disclosure of the information would prejudice the competitive bargaining position of the body or agency. And I will leave this with you. Is this effort to raise this much money from the most rural and vulnerable people in the area, is that economic development? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have it on the agenda 8A. We have it on the agenda 8A to discuss.
Right, but you also said that the new policy would not allow for any public comment at that time.
Correct.
Thank you very much.
Correct. Okay. Go ahead, Doug.
I'm just going to say there's something you may learn from that conversation.
Yeah, I plan to stick around for it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Can I speak?
You can. It's public forum.
Okay. I know this man is concerned about the price of the ambulance service in his town. I don't think he realizes that we've been talking about this for many years. But what he said tonight has no credence with what is going on in Caribou and Caribou owning an ambulance service. If they're not satisfied with the ambulance service price, they've got the right to refuse it and buy an ambulance on their own. And wouldn't that be the answer to their problem? And there'd be no argument? Because I might remind you people that we've been giving ambulance services to other towns at a cheaper rate than what we've been paying in this town, and we're assuming all the responsibility. And there's not going to be any more of this. I just wanted to remind you that you've got the right to buy your own ambulance.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else comment? John?
Thank you. Do see it on new business as well, and I'm hoping that this is also going to be discussed in executive session a little bit further. I'm requesting, if I can, to partake in that discussion once it goes into executive session. Well, I understand as a taxpayer here in the town that we have to make some tough decisions. It's a lot easier when we have budgets and that we can actually see each line item for a number of years. These budgets help us be able to make an educated decision instead of a knee-jerk decision, and I think that's where we're at right now. The community has, for a number of years, kicked the can down the road on a number of different things, and this is no different. But to do it as a knee-jerk reaction, I really think we would be doing wrong to not only our community, but the communities that have experienced some of our graciousness with the $11.50 fee, as well as the benefit of our ability to provide that. I'm not going to go as far as to tell somebody, go get your own ambulance, just because. I find that to be quite rude, and I think we can do better than that. I think we need to just sit down and really discuss this. If we need to bring the chief in and go over his budgets and find out why it is that our budget for Caribou is $2.6 million, $2.8 million, somewhere in that range, when Presque Isle, a larger department, larger population, is $1 million less. Well, that would be something I'd like to know why. I'd like to know that before I go tell somebody that go buy an ambulance. So I'd appreciate if you would involve me in the discussion. I think there's might be some other avenues that we could do to make this a little bit more fair. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any other comments? Yes, sir?
John Hedman, Town of Perham, so I don't want to reiterate what Mr. Rasmussen has said. Looking at 8A, multiple communities affected by the ambulance issue, we are neighbors. Every one of those communities there contribute to retail sales and all of that. So I'm asking you also, and I don't want to spend too much time, but being limited for speaking on 8A, we do recognize that you have looked at this before. We have never complained about the rates in Perham, and I was in New Sweden for a long time as well. Those have been very reasonable. What does astound me is that $11.50 to $100 in one fell swoop is, I could choose a lot of adjectives for that. Modest increases in the last 5, even 10 years could have softened this. So our appeal is reasonableness, and we are certainly more than willing. I'm sure you're aware, providing EMS services, of restrictions, whether they're privately owned or by municipalities. Distance and time is a factor to respond to calls. And a overarching question for us is, we had an email through the Town of Perham from Mr. Marker indicating that the current agreement would stay in effect until January 31st. That's the only correspondence we've had relative to that. A specific question would be, what happens when it's the Sheriff's Department, State Police, or a resident from Perham makes a 911 call from Perham, an accident, whatever it might be, on February 1st. My understanding is 911 goes to dispatch, and they look for the nearest provider. We have legal questions about that in terms of what our legal exposure might be and yours. If a call is made and the response is, we don't have anybody available, I'm sure you realize that's a question we're getting from our citizens. So we're more than willing to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak? Yes, Wilford?
I realize I sounded a little insulting to some of the other people in the other towns, but they don't realize that living in Perham and New Sweden and Washburn and Stockholm has consequences. And when they depend on Caribou to furnish ambulance services, they got to expect to pay as much or a little more than what the Caribou residents do. The Caribou residents are assuming all the responsibilities for labor, for materials, for ambulances, and if we're going to service these communities, we ought to get together with all those communities and explain to them what the consequences are. It makes me look bad to get up here tonight and tell you what should be done. And the blame is all on me, and I'm willing to take it. I don't give a damn, okay? But something has got to be done about this. We can't have other towns coming into us and dictating any policies. Do I make myself clear as a citizen of Caribou, Maine?
Thank you, Wilford. Anybody else? Hearing none, I'll close the public forum. Quick comment? Oh, Ellen here?
Yes.
Oh, gee, should have jumped right up.
Well, I wanted to make sure everybody was done with.
You want to follow that?
No? But I do understand. I'm Ellen Angel with Artifacts Architects and Engineers in Bangor, Maine, and I've been selected by all of you folks to be the architect evaluating some buildings here in Caribou for the purposes of the police department and also for looking at programming for the police department. So I want to tell you as quickly as I can a little bit about us and about what we plan on doing. So our firm is fairly small. It's been growing and changed our name since the last time we were here, which was Ames Associates. But we specialize in two things. We do a lot of historic preservation and renovation work, including assessments of historic buildings, and we do a lot of public safety and municipal work. Those are the two areas that encompass about 90% of our work. Actually municipal and nonprofits. So we're very used to working with clients who have limited budgets. And that's important because I think we all have limited budgets in this day and age. And it seems that the economy always seems to affect the prices faster than it affects our ability to pay for those prices. So when a community looks on the possibility of a new facility for public safety, be it police or fire, there's a heavy price involved. And what I wanted to make clear starting this, because I think later on you're all going to get questions about this, is why do these facilities cost so much money? And there's a couple of things. One is all public facilities, public safety facilities since 2012 have been required to meet a higher standard of construction than other building types. So only hospitals really and schools have to meet the same standards as police and fire stations. Right? So you're working at that level. Also, there's been a philosophical change that's reflected in the newer codes. And the codes in my business are basically the law. And not meeting a code is like breaking the law, right? I know people have, different concerns about why do we have to do this and why do we have to do that. But everything that's in the IBC, which has been adopted by the state of Maine into what's called MUBEC, the Maine Uniform Building and Environmental Codes. Everything that's in there is the result of some disaster that's happened that someone has brought up and said, are we doing what we should do with our buildings to avoid this? Not small things, typically big things. I mean, things in my lifetime that I remember, like the fire in the Las Vegas hotel where people were jumping out of the windows, or the the nightclub in New Jersey that burnt down with people in it, or so all of these code changes have been the result of those things. And right now, the state has adopted, at least they say they have, I haven't seen it in the websites, but the 2018 IBC, which requires that public safety buildings be sprinklered, as well as meeting some of these higher structural standards, as well as being outside the 500-year floodplain and some other issues. So it's put a higher requirement on these buildings than your house or, a gas station or a store, a convenience store, any of those things. And it tends to cost more money. The other thing is a philosophical change that says that if everything else goes, there should be a police station, a fire station, a hospital, an emergency operations center, so that somebody in the community can say, well, those guys can help me. There's somebody there to help. Because if that's not there, there's nothing there. So the prices of those facilities have gone up. And I know it's hard on a community and on a council to look at those numbers when they start to come in and say, oh my God, how do we pay for this? And I know you've looked at that in the face previously and said, well, we can't. But we're going to do our best to find the most reasonable way of doing this that provides everything that your community needs, that your department needs, and that you're looking for, and that you can explain to the citizens and say, this is why it costs the way it does. So as transparent as we can with all of our findings and with all of our costs, and we hope that we make you happy, and because we definitely want to make these police guys happy and get them out of the basement. I think that's a long time overdue. If you have any questions for me now, I'd be happy to answer them. I'll also be here tomorrow. The way we are doing this process is we will start tomorrow in evaluating the building options that you have available at this point that you are thinking as potential sites for the police department. So I'll be looking at those buildings tomorrow morning. Tomorrow afternoon, I'll be joined by an associate, a consultant who's out of Baltimore, Maryland, who does basically public safety projects. That's all he does them all over the country. And we've worked with him on several projects. We chose to go this direction because he's so knowledgeable. We do 1 or 2 public safety projects a year. He probably does 50. So there's a huge amount of information and experience that he brings to this process. So we'll be meeting with the department tomorrow afternoon to go over all of the organizational things and the facility needs that they have. So I'll be here all day tomorrow if you have any other additional questions. If there's anything I can answer right now, be happy to do that.
Anybody else want to speak on public comment? I close the public portion of this meeting. Okay, any questions for this young lady?
I'm good.
Thank you for calling me a young lady.
I really don't know what your charge is, so I'm very anxious. I'm anxious to come meet you tomorrow morning.
Okay, that's good.
Are you going to stay for most of the meeting?
I can.
Well,
I'm spending the night here, so.
Okay. If you have to get up and leave, I'll follow you out. I'll set up a time with you.
All right.
Because I just really don't know. I don't even have an idea what buildings you're going to go look at. I mean, I got a general. We're talking about the Sitel building. We're talking about VMS building. We're talking about
This building.
And you're going to look at this building.
That's correct. Those are the 3. So we'll look.
So I mentioned. Okay.
That's right. So we'll look at them from a couple of different standpoints. The main one is going to be. Just as a general facility assessment, right? What's the condition of the building? Floors, ceiling, walls, exterior, windows, heating, ventilation, electrical. Just go down the list and look at the condition of that. Then we'll look at it from the potential for housing. Primarily the police, but I suppose if you put the police in this building, then you have to also look at those other buildings as options for the the rest of the city hall. So that would be the secondary purpose of that. And that, as I said, that's going to easily take up the morning. So
Okay. I'll meet up with you and any other counselor that would like to meet up once we set a time. So, thank you.
all right. Well, I'll be here at 8 in the morning.
8 in the morning?
Yes.
So the schedule that we have for tomorrow morning right now is 8 o'clock here, walking through this building. The plan is to meet over at VMS building at 9:30 and walk through that briefly, and then at 10:30, roughly 10:30 to noon, walk through the Sitel building. And then after, have a short lunch break, and then move on to meeting with the departments or going back and looking at things as needed.
Okay,
All righty.
thank you.
Okay.
Item number 5, November financial report. Dennis.
Move down to it. So overall, we're right now in the process of getting into the year-end information, and so this is it's a little bit of an older report as far as that's concerned. Generally, the expenses for the year. My computer's being funny tonight, sorry. So general expenses for the year, we are under budget for the expenses as far as going through November is concerned. So the bottom line for that totals, we had budgeted 9.9 million total for the year. Through November, we were at 8.9 million, and so we were at 90.61% of expenses through the year, with December still to come. So sitting in a decent position as far as expenses are concerned. The revenues are in a similar situation. We were a little bit ahead in the revenues. Ultimately, we'll be bringing the year-end information to you, we hope, at the next meeting. And it's looking tight, but we should be able to end the year with expenses being slightly under budget, and revenues may be under budget still, but the difference in the expenses and the revenues still is going to offset to where we come out a little bit ahead at the end of the year. Not by much, but we should be sitting fine by the end of the year. We're still in the process right now with the departments. Today was the last day to submit any 2019 bills to finance for processing. And so, as I said, everything should be coming in at the end of this, or at your next meeting, for final year-end information. Okay.
Any questions from the council? Chair will entertain a motion to accept the November financial statements.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Tom, seconded by Joan, to accept the November financial statements as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor?
One abstention.
One abstention. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for passing it, one abstention. Thank you. Dennis, at the next meeting, could you have the explanation on how we're going to introduce a new line item for 2020 called the Rainy Day Fund? Could be simple, could be complicated. I don't know how it's done. Could you tell me?
It's not real complicated, but we'll make sure you have that information.
Explain it to us, please. Thank you. Item number 6, City Council minutes, 6A, regular meeting held on December 9th, 2020. Chair will entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Mayor, excuse me, we just need to clarify the agenda was misprinted. It's 2/19, December 9th, 2019, not December 9th, 2020.
Okay.
So
Okay, that was moved by Hugh.
Second?
Seconded by Joan to accept the minutes. Any additions, corrections, subtractions? Hearing none, all those in favor?
One abstention.
5-4, 1 abstention. 6B, organizational meeting,
Okay, sorry.
5, right?
No, you said 5-4, and I was saying
No, no.
5-4.
5 for the motion. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, I get it. Okay, I'll figure that one out. 6B, organizational meeting held January 2nd. Chair will entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Doug, seconded by Nicole to accept the organizational minutes for the January 2nd meeting. Any comments, questions, additions, subtractions? Hearing none, all those in favor? 6 for it. Gee, humphins. Okay. 7B, awards, appointments, and bidding openings. We have several awards tonight. The recognition of service for the Residential Urban Renewal Committee members. We had formed a committee. Council formed a committee back in April of last year to look at a blight condition of caribou. And they gave us a very nice report. And we've started to work on the report that they gave us. And before we go too much farther, we wanted to recognize those people. There was Timothy Ring, Jay Cam, Karen Rockwell-Willette, Jessica Plord, and Chairman Paul Camping. The city has put together certificates suitable for framing in recognition of the work. They did an excellent job. They realized they didn't have to reinvent the wheel, and boy, did they give us some good reading material, but the answers are there. And we're going to start to implement, I think it's called, We Can Do It, a 5-step quick plan in how to address blight in our community. We're going to ease our way through it. So, Paul, would you mind? I want to thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. It's an honor serving you.
You served the council and the citizens of Caribou.
Excellent, thank you.
And you did a great job. You really did. The start of something that needs to be done. And I appreciate the fact that you took your volunteer time to do that. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Another recognition is for Dave Wakeham. Dave Wakeham has served on the Hospital District Board for many, many years. The Hospital District Board is the board that's responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of our hospital, our city-owned hospital. And as the young lady mentioned, this hospital has a lot of stringent criteria that they have to follow, because when disasters strike, like she mentioned, you want the hospital to be there. And through the hard work of Dave and the crew and the other members of the board, they've done an excellent job. You can walk through that building and it looks pretty darn good. But it's done with a sense of quality and a sense of understanding that tax dollars just aren't flying around there, or our monies aren't just flying around, and they do an excellent job in bringing it together. So we will present Mr. Wakeham with this certificate that is framed for the many years of work that he has put into it. So thank you very much, Mr. Wakeham.
Thank you, Dave.
He's not here. Yes, Paul.
Would you like me to present that on your behalf?
You can. That's right. You are on the committee, on the hospital district board also. That's right.
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Thank you very much.
Informing to him, I said thank you. I do appreciate his service.
Item 7C, appointments of members to the community and advisory boards. The first one is the Nylander Museum Board of Trustees. We had 3 position openings. Are they all for the same amount of years?
No.
Here we go. Ah, I love this part. Explain to me what I'm doing then?
There were 3 individuals that wanted to serve again on the Nylander board. One was Heather Hale and Gail Hagelstein, who has been the past chair for the Nylander board. And the final one was Kimber Noyes, who also has been serving there. We spoke with Gail about the service and their recommendations for terms on these. Gail would like to serve for another 3 years, as well as have Kimber serve for 3 years, and Heather Hale would be for a 1-year term.
Thank you. Chair will entertain a motion to accept. We'll do the 2 3-year terms first. Gail Hagelstein and Kimber Noyes for 3-year terms on the Nylander Museum Board of Trustees.
So, second.
Moved by Doug, seconded by Hugh. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor? Motion unanimous. Chair will entertain a motion to accept Heather Hale for a 1-year term on the Nylander Museum Board of Trustees.
So moved.
Second?
Moved by Joan, seconded by Doug. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 2, Citizens Airport Advisory Committee. One person, there's one position and one person. Tom Getz. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Chair will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Doug and seconded by Hugh to nominate Tom Getz for the Citizens Airport Advisory Committee. Is this how many year term would this be?
3 year.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor? Motion carries. Planning Board. 2 positions are open, but we have 1 member, 1 person that would like to fill one of those seats.
Mayor,
Go for it.
so it was, since the time that the packet went out, we received 2 applications for the planning board, if you'd like to entertain those tonight. One is Mr. David Corvo. I understand he was at the planning board meeting last week and participated there as a citizen. Also a Mr. Drew Ayer. And they're both interested in serving on the planning board if the council would like to make those appointments.
Chair will entertain a motion to accept or to appoint Dave Corvo.
Okay.
One's 3 years.
One's 3 years, one's 1 year.
Okay. Pick a name.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move to accept Dave Corvo for the 3-year and Drew Ayer for the 1 year.
Okay.
I'd second that.
Moved by Tom, seconded by Doug. Dave Corvo for 3-year term. Drew Air for a one-year term on the planning board. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Blight Commission. Okay, I got that one. Blight Commission. I have a Blight Commission. Dennis Marker for facilitator. John Swanberg, Ken Murchison, Phil Sear, Penny Thompson, and Paul Camping. The goals: to gain a consensus for developing a blight strategy with categories and definitions for each category. Access nature and extent of the blight within the different categories. Goal number 3, develop strategies and priorities for the development of the categories through flow charts of authority, flow charts of financial, and flow charts of problem solving. Review, number 4, review tools required to implement problem solving. And the council would like to have a report to the best of their ability to the council by May 1st, 2020. So on the table tonight is the Blight Commission. Dennis Marker, John Swanberg, Ken Murchison, Phil Sear, Penny Thompson, and Paul Camping. Chair will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Hugh, seconded by Tommy. Any comments or questions?
We,
Go.
we'll be getting minutes, there'll be minutes of the meetings and,
We can provide those.
yeah. Thank you. That's it.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Mayor, for the information of the council, knowing ahead of time who is going to be on that committee, we've already scheduled our first meeting for tomorrow, and that will be held at 1 o'clock.
Well, then, let's move up that date. Instead of May 1st, you can have that done by April. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Appointment of counselors to the council committees. Okay, that's in here somewhere, it's right here. First committee we're going to look at, and this is, throw your name on the fire, guys. Here we go. The Highway Protection Committee. Anybody want to serve on that? Raise your... Nicole? Anybody else?
I will.
Joan? We ought to get one more. Well, how about Jody? He's not here. Let's throw him on that baby. Jody. Now, these do not have to be voted on.
No,
This is where the power of the mayor comes in. Got it. Investment Committee. Anybody?
I'd get on that.
Doug? Anybody else? I'm going to put my name on this one. Mark. And what the heck? Jody.
Boy, he's going to earn his wings tonight.
CEGC Committee.
I'd like to stay on.
You're on. NMDC Committee. That's me. That's my name down there. Anybody want to do that? If not, I'll do it. Personnel Committee.
I'd like to stay on.
Okay. Nicole. And here it says all council members. Is this a code? Is this a charter thing? So we don't all have to be on it.
no.
Okay. So, anybody else want to be on it?
Yeah, sure.
Tom? Anybody else?
I'll go on if there's nobody.
Joan? And just because we're not on the committee in an official way doesn't mean we can't go to the meetings. Correct?
It's again, if you've got more than two of you there, it has to notice as a public meeting no matter what, so.
Every one of the, we've had 3 so far,
Right,
so nothing's gained. Airport Committee,
Yeah, I'll stay on as chair.
Thomas?
I'll stay on.
I'll stay on.
You technically got off, and Jody took your place.
That's right. Remember that?
I remember.
Not really.
Okay. You want to go back, you
Sure.
want to be back on it?
Sure.
Okay. There's 3 right there.
if I recall, we had a council liaison to the Citizens Airport Advisory Board, and then we have the city council's airport board. And so there was a question of
Who's who?
who wants to be the liaison to the Citizens Board versus on the council board.
You can do double duty.
Okay.
I'll stay on that.
Okay. Nylander Board. It says here, a council liaison. Jody. His name's there, let's keep him there. Planning Board,
I'll stay on.
council liaison, Thomas Ayer. Municipal Building,
I'll take municipal.
Doug.
I'd also like to do that, Mr. Mayor.
Tom. Dave Martin was on it. Dave Willett, Gary Markey. You? Put you
Okay.
on the spot?
Okay.
Okay. Agency on the Aging. Mark gone. I'll take that one. Housing Board. I'll take that one, and we need one more. Well, we need 2 counselors. And Doug.
Okay.
Mayor,
Yes.
Jane whispered in my ear, do you want to designate who the chair of the committees will be? That's one of
I
your
could.
roles as the mayor is to determine who's going to be chairing these committees.
Okay, let's go back then to the Highway Protection. How about you, Joan? You were chair last year. You want to try it again?
Unless Nicole wants to.
You are more than welcome to.
Thank you,
We
Joan.
didn't do much last year anyway.
What's the other one? The investment. How about we make Jody chair?
My God.
CEGC. That does not require a chair. NMDC does not require a chair. Personnel. Nicole Cody, chair.
Yep.
Airport, Thomas Ayer, chair. Nylander Board does not require. Planning Board does not require. Municipal buildings. Doug, you want to be chair?
I'll be chair.
Attaboy. Agency on the Aging does not require. And Housing Board does not require a chair. Okay. Now, what's it say down here? Something about capital committee. The charter budget process also speaks about a capital committee. The mayor could form this committee with city council representatives to consider capital requests during the budget process. Okay. We can form that at a later date.
If you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Jody's going to come to the next one of these meetings.
Loaded. Teach him to miss a meeting.
Yeah, it will. Okay. Item number 8, new business and adoption of ordinance and resolutions. And here's the magic one. 8A, discussion of possible action regarding the 2020 EMS service contracts with Caswell Connor, Limestone, New Sweden, Perham, Stockholm, Wade, Washburn, Westmoreland, Woodland, and Madawaska Lake Township. I want to just make a quick comment, if I may, on some of the comments during the public comment period. We want to be good neighbors. We want to represent the citizens of Caribou fairly. Did I mention we want to be good neighbors? This is a tightrope act we're following here, and we're trying to balance this thing to the best of our ability. It's my personal opinion that this type of analysis should have been done 7 or 8 years ago. We have, I just myself got on the council a couple of years ago. Doug just got on. Huey got on. Tommy last year. Nicole, relatively, only 3 years. And I consider it a blessing, and Jody, and I consider it a blessing that we've had a council that has come together and decided to look at this problem. It's so easy to take problems and ignore them and hope that they go away. This one's not going to go away. And I want to tell you, from the numbers I'm looking at, from the perspective of Caribou, or from the perspective of surrounding communities, there are no winners in this baby. None. This is a no-win situation. My personal belief, we ought to get out of the ambulance service.
Amen.
But we want to be good neighbors, and we want to do it right. On March 28th, wait a minute, I got to start, excuse me. On March 11th, the mayor asked for and council received actual revenue and expense figures for the different fund balances of the city. On March 19th, Councilor Hugh asked for and received fire and ambulance actual revenue and expense figures for the years 2004 through 2012. On March 19th, the mayor asked for and received fire and ambulance contracts with the surrounding communities. March 28th, mayor sent the email to councilors using the actual numbers of what the Caribou citizens were paying, $140 a person, and what surrounding communities were paying if you had taken both fire and ambulance, and it was $70 a person. On March 30, Hugh emailed councilors the financial performance of the fire and ambulance department for the last 15 years. On April 1st, council requested and received from manager actual numbers for the fire and ambulance for revenue and expenses for the years 1994 through 2004. Basically, we started working with a 25-year history of actual numbers and actual revenues. All the meanwhile, the council was patient in letting us do this. We did it quietly, we did it professionally, and we did it in a way that we just wanted to let the numbers breathe. Council, on April 4th, council requested and received the 2012 council report that the council had done back in 2012 about privatizing the ambulance service. Around the 1st of May, we received a request from Limestone if we would take over their ambulance situation. The whole time, the council was dealing with the River Road failure. We were dealing with snow removal of the hydrants, from the hydrants, the food pantry at 60 Access Highway, labor issues within the ambulance department, street lights, medical marijuana, Floridale Park, public safety building, Sitel parking lots, and more. The whole thing came to a head in October, November, when Hugh made a presentation that showed me, anyways, what this was costing us and the trends that had to be stopped. Just so happens, 2 weeks later, we were asked to renew the surrounding community's fire and ambulance service. Here we are. There's no winners here. No winners. If anybody wants to take this fire and ambulance service over, we offer it to you, and we'll rent it from you. Dennis, I gave an historical how we got here. Would you please show the presentation of those numbers that over the last year the council has asked for and you were nice enough to give to us, and the format in which you placed it in. And this is a thing in motion. We're still working on it.
Mayor, this same information, I know it was mentioned earlier that the city should be out communicating with the other towns and sharing information. We have been doing that. We held at least 3 meetings. Chief Susi is actually out tonight at another town's meeting. I know Woodland's having a meeting tomorrow night, and they've invited several towns to attend, and I will be there with the chief to that one. Limestone is having a meeting Wednesday night, and there's other meetings being held the week after this. We're trying to make sure that everybody understands the information. We need to make sure that there's understanding out there. And generally what we're finding is people recognize, and the towns recognize, this probably should have been happening a long time ago. They've generally said that. Even tonight, it was basically said, if this had started a while back and we ramped up for a period of time, that would have been easier to swallow. And that being what it is, we are where we are. And so just to give some background into the city, obviously we have our EMS service that covers our city boundaries. And for several years now, we've been providing ambulance services to Connor, Woodland, New Sweden, Lake Township, Westmoreland, Perham, Stockholm. Last year, we had the rumblings of Crown pulling out of communities, and Wade and Washburn approached Caribou and Presque Isle to split their cities. And so in 2019, we took on part of Wade and Washburn. We've been approached this year by Caswell. They would like us to start running out there, and they have about 35 runs on average a year over the last 3 years. And so we, as an ambulance service, we do have a large reach right now. When we look at the cost, or I shouldn't say, before we get into the cost, some of the things we're looking at, the population in this area, the dark red is Caribou's population, and the other towns that have been receiving service are above that. But you can see back in the 2000 census, all of the service area that was under contract at the time was just under 12,000 people, and there's been a steady decline ever since then. When in 2017, according to those estimates, we were almost 1,000 people less than the 2000 census. In 2018, we started the discussions with Washburn and Wade, and you can see when we took them under our wing, it brought us up to about where we were in 2000 as far as the total population being served by the ambulance department. Over that same time frame, what you're looking at here is a chart of the calls, the EMS calls and the runs that we did for the service. So in 2000, we were a little around 1,600 calls a year. We peaked in 2003 at about 2,400 calls, and there's been a gradual trend upward since that time frame. It's interesting to note that this line that I'm pointing out now is the calls for in-town service, and you can see there's a general trend for that going down. And the line at the bottom is the trend for calls out-of-town service. So we're starting to see, again, while there's a general trend upward, the in-town services are trending downward and out-of-town going upward. Ironically, again, the population for the area is coming down, but the calls for service are going up. We know we have an aging population. There's more calls, and again, how do we provide the service, knowing that yes, the general trend is the population is coming down, but overall costs are also increasing. If I might quickly address the comment about why Presque Isle has a budget that's $1 million less than ours. Part of that is where the numbers are in their budget. They have their health insurance is not in their fire and EMS department. It's a separate line. Their capital facilities is a separate line. A lot of it is where in the budget are the numbers at. And I've had that same conversation with City Manager Martin over there, and we recognize we can't do a true comparison without them going through additional analysis to combine all of their costs into the same way that we have ours. When we look at the council adopted budget for 2020, we have in our budget one fund, Fund 31, which includes fire and ambulance. But we went through the exercise of if we were to break them out and looking at them separately as much as we could, what would be the costs? The fire costs would be about $461,000, and the ambulance cost a little over $2.2 million. So our combined operation, and these are operation and capital costs and benefits, fully burdened costs in these numbers. So overall, almost $2.7 million for both the fire and ambulance service. The communities that are utilizing those services, we only have 4 towns that are using the fire service right now: Caribou, New Sweden, Connor, and Woodland, and quite a few more that are utilizing the EMS service: Caribou, New Sweden, Connor, Perham, half of Wade, all of Westmoreland. Township 16R4 is the Madawaska Lake community. We have half of Washburn, and then the town of Woodland. When you look at the populations being served, the fire population is just under 10,000 people. And I'll add here that this same presentation was given to the towns earlier. I've gone back, I've double-checked all of these numbers, and these ones are slightly higher in population than the ones were presented earlier. But you'll see that as a matter of it's a factoring element, it doesn't change very much in the total analysis. EMS, you have 11,773 people, and these are based on the 2017 census estimates. We will have a new census conducted this year, and where they'll be going around knocking on people's doors and asking people to fill out surveys. Again, I guess just a quick plug for make sure that you're making or filling out those surveys and getting your name on the count. That's a lot of times what some of these funding hinges upon. When you look at the cost, so just for the fire department, if you take that $461,000 divided by that population being served, you're looking at a cost per person before revenues of $47 to have the fire service. The EMS service is $190 before revenues. The issue that we have is really the revenues and the system that we have to deal with, not that the city has in place, but the environment that we have to work within to get revenues for having an ambulance service. For instance, when you have somebody that has a private insurance, like Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, if we make a run for that patient and we bill their insurance, generally we get close to 100% of what we've asked for or what we've billed for. If a patient has federal insurance, we only get 80% of what we are able to bill. So we don't ask people before we load them into the ambulance, which insurance do you have, so we can provide you 80% of the service. We make the run regardless. But when the service is done and we send out the bills, we only get 80% of what's being billed. For those that have state insurance, we're only getting 40% of the Medicaid payment. So even less reimbursement than what we've been getting. There are a handful of people that they don't have insurance and they self-pay. We can't count, really, we don't get hardly any revenue from those situations, and so it's, as far as the budgeting goes, it's a zero on the revenues. When you look at the scenario of state only reimburses us so much and the federal only reimburses us so much, the hope is that we're treating more private insurance patients because we're able to get more revenue. The reality that we have with the demographics, the community characteristics that we have is most people are on federal insurance or state insurance. And as one citizen told me one day as they heard the siren going down the street, I hope that's not the ambulance, because if it is, we're losing money. That's most likely the case. To help illustrate that, in 2014, we talk about a payer mix. We ran over 2,100 calls. 60% of those patients were on the federal Medicaid. 10% were on main care. 20% had private insurance, and 10% were on self-pay. After all the bills went out, this is hypothetical, these are not actual revenues for that time frame, but just based on the reimbursement rates, if every run was billed $100, we would have been reimbursed $72 out of the $100. So there's the gap. In 2018, we had a shift in that now we have 40% of the patients were on the federal programs, 30% on the state, only 10% private, and now 20% on the self-pay. We had more calls in 2018, but we ended up with less revenue per call because of the different payer mix that we had, where we were getting almost $54 per $100 billed in 2018. In 2019, our city staff, particularly Chief Susi, big kudo to him and the State of Maine Chiefs Association, they worked with the legislature to try to get the state to pass a law that would increase the reimbursement rate. The law was passed and indicated that it would begin reimbursing the same amount that the federal reimbursement rate would be. Unfortunately, the implementation rule that was put into place this year, it's not a 100% match to the federal rate. For Caribou, they're allowing us to bill and be reimbursed at what they call the urban Bangor rate. And so rather than getting an 80% reimbursement at the federal level, we are going to get more than the 40%, but it's going to be more like a 60% reimbursement rate. So still less than the federal rate, but it's more than we have been getting in the past, and so that will help. But still, even with that increase, we're only looking at $60 on the $100 billed process. So when you look at the revenues, and these are based on historic trends and current payer mix that we're working with, the fire department makes very little money. Most of the revenues that we receive come from administrative processes like fire permits or private fires, or coming in paying some fees. And when you look at adding the revenues to the budgeted expenses, we're trying to match or make up $455,000. And so if you take that $455,000 net expense divided by the population served, you're about $46 per person for a fire service. Excuse me. The EMS service, again, based on trends with our runs and the payer mix, we're projecting $1.5 million of revenue for EMS service. But when you have an expense of $2.2 million, we still have a $700,000 difference between revenues and expenses that we need to make up. When you divide that by the population being served, you're at $60 per person for the cost of having that. And so combined, just for 2020, if you only look at that year alone, you'd be looking at $106 per person. But when you take into account the need to plan for other capital reserves and future expenses, you're closer to $125 per person for both of those services. Just to give you an idea, this year alone we have almost $250,000 of expense at the fire station dealing with a new roof and structural upgrades that are necessary. Over the next 5 years, we'll be remounting 2 ambulances rather than buying new ones. It's a cost savings to the operations, but it still is going to be about $200,000 of expense. And so that $125 per person is really what we're looking at right now and has been proposed to the other towns. If you want fire and EMS service, the cost would be $125 per person. Historically, where we've been, our fire contracts were not based on a per person amount. New Sweden, by a contract, was paying about $35,000, and so their cost per person was about $60. Connor was paying almost $30,000 at a cost of roughly $70 per person, and Woodland was paying $64,000 at roughly $62 per person, again using the 2017 numbers. Caribou's cost for, again, looking at that difference that we're trying to make up, the remainder of the amount of the difference was made up by Caribou, which would have been about $42 per person for the fire service. But when you look at the contracts for EMS and all the outside communities that we're providing service for paying $11.50, it meant that Caribou citizens were paying closer to $83 per person for the ambulance service. And so combined, Caribou is already paying close to $125 per person for the service, while the other communities significantly less. So as we have been meeting with the communities, we've approached them, we've indicated to them that there's 3 options that we can see right now that we would look at. One would be that they don't have a contract for service with Caribou, in which case there would be no annual fees. If a call is sent to us or sent to dispatch, dispatch would not have us as the first response, but they would call around and they would find out where's the closest ambulance and can they respond. If Caribou is there, we have the crews available, we would likely still roll, but we're not going to leave the contracted communities nor Caribou unprotected. And so there could be limited paging in of staff to make the runs, or there may be stacking of calls. Historically, well, not historically, but over the past few years, we have limited our stacking of calls so that we could get out as quickly as possible. We may not be able to continue to have that operational aspect. We may have to start stacking calls. Already, and last week it was sent out in the good to knows to the council and the citizens. We've already made some adjustments in how we operate the ambulance service with callbacks. There will be some initial evaluation of patients and not an automatic call-in from the service so that we can reduce some of our costs better. The downside to this, obviously, is that there would not be a contract. We would respond as best as we could. The town would be receiving a $500 bill for any run that we make out to their community, just as a flat rate. It's adopted by the council into our fee schedule as a standard operational rate. The second option that we would have is that we continue with a contract with the communities, and the EMS service would be $100 per person annually. There would be no additional fee for the runs out to the communities. The Caribou Ambulance Service would continue to charge the patients and their insurance for the services in the hopes to recoup as much as we can from them. That $100, again, is established just to try to make up that deficit in what we'd be receiving. Caribou, because we're under contract then with those communities, we would have obligation to respond and therefore would need to work the house accordingly. Some towns would, or they may be able to continue having fire and EMS service with the city. For those communities, the cost would be $125 per person. And again, no additional fees to the towns. We would continue to provide the services as we have basically in the past. We recognize it is a steep change in cost from $11.50 per person to $100. To give everybody an idea of the impacts that could be seen, the town of Connor, based on their historic call volumes over the last 3 years, if they were to not have a contract with us and we just billed them $500 per run to Connor, their budget impact would be about $14,000 for the EMS service. If they have a contract with us under the new $100 rate, they'd be looking at $41,000. And if they continue to have fire and EMS, it'd be $52,000. Coming back to this previous slide, so currently they're paying $30,000 for the fire plus the $5,000 for EMS, so $35,000 as opposed to going to $41,000 for just EMS or $52,000 for fire and EMS. And the other towns would be impacted in a very similar fashion. New Sweden would go from, or being at $42,000 based on their historic runs, to $59,000 at the $100 rates, or $74,000 for fire and EMS services. The town that would be impacted the most as far as the change would be Woodland, because they have the higher population in the region next to us in Limestone. Based on their call volume, they don't have a lot of call volume, and so potentially if they said just we won't have a contract, bill us when you come, they may be looking at $40,000 a year for EMS service. Under contract, over $100,000, and if we have EMS and fire, $130,000. So it is an impact, and we recognize that, and I appreciate the council's comments on that and the historical overview that Mayor Gahn provided. It's a situation that it's not unique to Caribou. Because of the reimbursement situation we deal with at the federal and the state level and the demographics that we have in the region, it is, as Mayor Gahn has mentioned, it's a losing situation for everybody, and we're trying to figure out how can we maintain the service as best as possible. So, Mayor, that's what I have, and the same information is being shared with the other communities. There's no easy way to sugarcoat something like this, but we're hoping that at least we can share the information and there'll be better understanding.
Thank you, Dennis. I want to clarify my statement of my personal opinion of getting out of the ambulance service is with proper notification to other communities. That was not an option for this year. We're going to do something. But somehow Crown decided that this was a no-winner deal, and they got out of it. And I think they gave a year's notice to their towns, I think. Proper notice would have to be given. I am not saying that we would do it immediately. Any questions or comments from the council? Dougie?
I'd like to add that maybe we should inform our friends and neighbors that the price per capita that we're discussing right now doesn't necessarily meet what the Caribou taxpayers' per capita burden is, and surely by the following year, we would all be paying the same. And I would put my compassion hat on, and I too feel for this big increase. Listen, you're all friends and neighbors of mine, and I think the world of all my neighbors. But when I put my business hat on and I see numbers like that, it's a sinking ship. And how do we as counselors go to our taxpayers and say, you know, we're going to subsidize other communities when we can't by their dollars? We just can't do that. It's a no-win situation, as the mayor has mentioned. It was brought up years ago, and I kind of threw the red flag up and yelled the sky was falling, and it fell on deaf ears. And I blame myself for getting discouraged back in around 2008, when at that time it was a different situation politically in the town, and I couldn't it fell on deaf ears. And instead of picking it up and taking it to the level that Hugh did, I got discouraged, and I kind of said to heck with it and threw it in the air and walked away. So I bear some of the responsibility here as to why this, even though I wasn't recently on the council, this was a red flag back then. And I'll just leave it at that. So I think that it should be a clear understanding from this point forward that if it's $100 this year, it could be, our end game is that we're all paying the same. We're going to have to. Otherwise, myself in this one seat, I cannot ask the Caribou taxpayers to subsidize another community for ambulance runs. I just can't do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Any other comments? We're going to go into executive session at the end of the meeting, and we're going to discuss the points that you, sir, brought up. And you, sir, brought up. And John, what you brought up. We're going to bring up some of these points and look at our options that we've passed out and the time frame that we did it in. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat this, baby. And the comments that are flying on what our intentions are from this council just aren't true. It's a can of worms if I call on you, but go ahead.
What statute specifically are you going to cite for this executive session?
We're going to try to see if, I don't know. Take me to court. This is,
a FOIA document right here on behalf of the town of Perham for a number of people.
We go into 36 MS.
These are FOIA requests for a number of staff in the area for the council and fire emergency.
I guess I don't know what that means. What's he mean by that?
You'd like us to provide records of public information.
Okay.
So we'll process it like we're required to by statute.
Yep. And that's the greatest way to come together, right there, by throwing something like that at us. That shows working together.
What is it now? I'm sorry, I missed it. I'm looking here. It gives us our directions for executive session. Is there something different that he passed in?
No, this isn't related to that. This is a records request.
Okay.
So the executive session, obviously, in the past we've looked at it from a contractual standpoint and looking at the economics of the situation, and not only from it's the use of the city's resources, properties, and the council being able to take the opportunity to discuss in executive session negotiation strategies and other things and how you want to handle this. And so that's under...
But none of these numbers throughout the whole year that we've asked and you've received, numbers that you put up, these are all available to the public.
Yes,
Okay. We're not hiding nothing here.
right.
Okay.
Just a quick question or clarification. Under state law, if I'm not mistaken, each community by law, don't they have to have an ambulance service within their community?
No.
They don't
They're,
have to,
they're required to have a fire service, but not an EMS
but not
service.
ambulance, okay.
The indication that I'm hearing from a legislative aspect is that within a couple of years, it may be mandated by the state that communities have an EMS service,
Okay.
at which point everybody's going to have to take a serious look at what's happening there.
Because it's not necessarily another's community to be responsible for, like, it wouldn't necessarily be CARE's responsibility to provide any services to outside communities, just within our own.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dennis.
Not to be out of order, I'm going to leave, but I do thank you for the time.
Thank you.
And be in touch.
I can't tell you, sir, how nice and how diplomatic you were. No, it really, you can't.
44 years in the joys of public service.
No,
And my mother.
It's a,
I listen to her occasionally.
thank you very much for being diplomatic, sir. 8B, discussion possible action regarding bids for tax acquired property at 142 Lower Linden. Dennis. Oh, good. Go get him, Wolford.
I'm going to check on that.
See, you got to look at your assets in the right way, don't you? Okay, Dennis, 142.
During the last fiscal year, the city tax acquired the property commonly known as the power plant down on the river. It was formerly owned by Merlin One. Sorry, my mouse keeps jumping around on the screen.
Excuse me.
And the property has outstanding taxes of roughly $70,000. In order to try to maintain the property and its assets for sale, we've put about $10,000 of cost into it to try to keep the diesel plant heated. And it has been at this point pickled, if you would, so that all the water's been drained out of it, and we can not only turn the propane off, but now we can turn all the water off and make sure that it's still there for somebody to purchase. As I understand, the Caribou Utilities District has a similar amount of $70,000 of water usage that is owed on the property. The city has an agreement with the Utilities District that whenever we sell a tax-acquired property, that we would try to sell that property such that the city and the Utilities District would be made whole with any outstanding obligations. And so based on that, we're recommending that the city put this property out to bid with a minimum bid of $150,000, which would cover the city's obligations as well as provide additional funds to help offset the $70,000 for the CUD. It's proposed that we put it out to bid immediately and that we receive bids by January 30th. We would have it back to you as a council on the first meeting in February for consideration of the bids. We are still in a time frame according to our own policies in which the previous owner has an opportunity to redeem the property. They have until the end of this month to do that. Verbal indications between myself and the property owner are that they're not going to do that, and so that's why we're initiating this process a little bit earlier than we would have normally.
Chair will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to put 142 Lower Linden Street out to bid with a minimum bid of $150.
$50,000.
$150,000. Correct.
What a bargain.
What a bargain. It's made by Hugh, seconded by Tom. Any questions or comments? Doug?
What is our plan if that date comes and passes? Dumping good money, hard-earned money into a cesspool down there. What is our plan? And I'm assuming that 10,000, did I hear you say was for trying to keep it somewhat from freezing or eating the...
Right. When we walked into the diesel plant before Christmas, there were several pipes that had frozen up, and the concern was if we let it continue to be that way, that not only the pipes but the engines themselves would freeze up and break, and there would be next to no redeemable value there. And so we've heated it up enough to thaw out the pipes and get it drained. That being done, we'll turn off the heat, we'll turn off the water, and we'll let it sit until this gets resolved.
Those are diesel engines?
Yes.
Were those drained and pickled? Any of the fluids in it?
That's part of this draining process that they're looking at.
Okay. I just want to know what we're going to, we should have a plan as to, I'm not one to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but hey, if it doesn't, we cannot take the taxpayers' good money and hard-earned money and dump it into that place. Just a comment. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. 8C, discussion possible action regarding the lease option for solar project on Ogden Road, Ogden Dump. This had something to do with solar panels. They wanted to come on board and do a study, but they wanted to get a little more detailed on it.
So last year, the council entered into a letter of intent with this company. It's the lease agreement that you have in front of you today is, and I will treat this as a first read, but this is with Synergen Solar LLC. They're out of Maryland. Based on the environmental policies that are being implemented, the indication is that we have been approached by many companies looking to come in and take advantage of some of the solar tax breaks that are being provided in Maine. This is proposed that they would take their letter of intent in order to receive the tax benefits or the tax breaks to do some of the studies. They needed more than the letter of intent. They needed this option for lease of the property. The option basically states that they will work through their study of the ground, and if it's going to meet their needs, they will execute this lease. Without the option in place, they can't get benefits from the state to help fund some of the studies and derive the benefits that they would like to with it. The property being considered is the old Ogren dump, and there's at least 30 acres of ground there that's generally flat now that has a cap on it. I'm going to stop using that part of my computer tonight. The lease of the property would be for $500 per acre and annually for a period of 20 years. And they would also, upon execution of this lease option, make an initial payment of $2,500 to the city within 5 days of the option being approved. They would take the next 12 months, analyze the property, do what they need to. They recognize that it is an old landfill, and they would not be able to use their standard penetrating solar systems. And so they know it's going to be a little bit more costly project for them, but they would look at the next 12 months, they would do the study on it, and they'd figure out what they'd be able to do and if it would work. The $2,500 down payment, if you would, or the option fee is non-refundable. That would be the city's, regardless of their decision after the 12 months or within the 12-month time frame.
This is a first read deal. Joan?
I guess my question probably is for Penny. Do these solar arrays that are being put up here and there, do they pay like a personal property tax to the city?
Good question.
Thank you very much for your question. Until this year, 2020, yes, we have one solar array right now in Caribou, and the owner of that solar array was billed for business personal property for the energy he was generating. He was valued using the income approach, which is what Maine Revenue Service wanted me to use for an approach to value that property. Because of the lobbying efforts of the solar energy companies, they were successful in 2019 to have a new tax exemption, which is going to start in 2020 for all of these arrays that are smaller than anything that we would have here, really, in Maine. It would have, I don't even know where the closest one would be that would not be exempt for size. Anything we'd have is going to now be exempt. Now, we, as an assessor, we haven't received all the details on that yet. We were supposed to get those in December, and in December we had a few paragraphs stating that their intent is for us, the owner of the array will make application to the city for exemption with a form yet to be determined. At that time, the state will let us know what methodology they want us to use. The last meeting that I went to on this in September, as part of we had quite a few different topics, but one of them came up. But again, they were still in the process of determining what they were going to do. They're actually using they say they're going to use the methodology that I developed for Caribou, because Caribou was actually the first one that had to be taxed. The rest of them that had been around the state were not taxed because they were municipally owned and nonprofit owned. But back when I had to do Caribou's, all eyes were on me to decide what methodology was going to be used. The indications in September was that they're using the same tool that I had always used in Caribou. So we value the asset that would depreciate every year. We turn it, your assessing department here and other places in the state will turn that into Maine revenue. I assume this is going to be on our MVR, the municipal valuation return. That is where we submit to the state all other types of property that are exempt and for which the city receives a reimbursement, like homestead, veterans, Betty, all of that. Of course, that means the state will audit us to make sure that we are doing things their way. It is my understanding from the few paragraphs we've received already that the owners of the asset will not have to make application every year, that it will be up to the assessing department in each municipality in Maine revenue in the unorganized territory to go out to make sure that that is still performing, that asset. So up until 2019, yes, it was valued as business personal property. Going forward in 2020, it's going to be exempt. We will still have to value the asset. Statutorily, the state is supposed to be reimbursing us for 50% of the lost revenue because of the exemption. But we don't have, unfortunately, enough information. Just as a side note, if I can editorialize with my answer, it is good that they are treating everything the same statewide, though. What happened, our neighbor in a neighboring community, because they don't have full-time assessing staff, they weren't picking up assets in their community that were solar because it was too hard to do that. So basically, the owners of that asset were being charged 0% for their tax rate on that asset, where the asset in Caribou was paying 24.55. I don't think that's fair, particularly when, you know, all of this property fiscal capacity, which our valuation is part of that, goes back to figuring out what we're paying for county tax, what we're getting for revenue sharing, what we're getting for state aid to education. So when we have neighbors, and I've gotten very animated with the state on this, when their effective tax rate is 0, and ours is 24.55, that puts us at a disadvantage in a lot of ways. Even Connor, we lost a solar asset to Connor because being in the unorganized, their tax rate is 1/3 of what ours is in Caribou. So that's my editorializing on my answer.
Thank you.
So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Any other questions? Doug?
Back to, and I just briefed it again, is it their intent to break the ground surface and dig into it? If it is, I think there should be something in this contract that states it's, you dig up some bones, it's in your ballpark. We got stung with this, we being the taxpayers, years back on an expansion downtown that struck an oil tank, and the taxpayers had to bite the cleanup. And it worries me that, especially knowing what's out there, that we don't have some verbiage to protect the taxpayers, that if you decide to dig, what you hit, you own. And obviously we know once you expose contamination, you can't just fill it back in. They have to come good for the cleanup. So I just think that we should have some verbiage there to protect the citizens of Caribou. Thanks.
Another item that was brought up by our Public Works Director was that we are required to mow the grass on that every year. And if we put solar equipment on it, that's another thing we want to look at, is they'll need to be doing the mowing, because we're not going to be able to use our equipment in there anymore to do that. So with what you've brought up and the mowing, this is not ready for adoption tonight.
I understand.
And so we can definitely go, and I'll speak with DEP and see if they have some recommended language we might throw into this.
The past case was, all intents purposes, that group owned the property. We just hadn't signed paperwork. All parties knew who owned it. They were behind in getting started until they struck a tank, and then it was thrown in the taxpayer's lap to clean it up. And I really don't want to see that happen again. Thanks.
Good point. Doug? Any other comments or questions on this? This is the first read. Dennis, there must be other people doing this, so what's the standard rental fee, I guess would be my question in the industry.
I asked our real estate agent that's working with us on the 60 Access Highway to reach out to some of her associates, and she said $500 is a decent fee for this.
Okay. And if you run into any more people that you could ask them, just double check that number.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Thanks. That was a first read, so that requires no action. Discussion possible action regarding the 2020 Council Priorities Project. Wait a minute. This is the form that we each got in our packets. Dennis would like us to look at these individual, there's 6 of them. And what do you want? 1 to 5, 1 to 4? What do you, how do you want us to rate them?
I guess we're looking at, are there other projects within these areas that you as a council want to add to the list that we need to be making sure we focus on this year? What we'd like to do is have the council go through the lists of these projects, and then you give us your top, for instance, public safety. Those are the 4 that we can see from the staff side really need to be focusing on this year, but give us your ranking. What are your top 3 there? From the administration side, what are your top 4 out of all those projects, and so on. But if there's other ones that you don't see on here that you think we need to add to it, I think that's where we wanted to give it to you as a council to raise those, bring them up, and discuss those, and then ultimately go through this scoring exercise, get the information back to me, and then I can return it back to you as far as this is, everybody's voting on it. These are the major priorities for this year, 2020.
Okay. You.
Do you want us to just email you any additions? How do you want to do that?
Well, there's a place for other.
Right.
We could write them in.
Just write them in
Just
ourselves?
write them in.
Okay.
If it's something you know about tonight, it would be good to let all the other councilors know that that's something you're thinking about as well.
Under infrastructure, can you add additional streetlights?
That's the third good question tonight. Yes, that's a good one. Additional streetlights. That's right. We talked about that last year. Once we got the project done, we were going to go around and take care of the dark spots. Good point. Any others that anyone can think about? If you come across any, oh, go ahead.
Under economic development priorities, small business retention.
Small business retention. Okay. Any other comments, ideas? If you have any, email to all of us, counselors, and if you hear of any other ones.
Yep.
And we'll pass this in at the next city council meeting.
If you're doing it in advance of the council meeting, then I can have the results for you at the council meeting.
Got it. Can I have a slight edit? You see blight removal from community development? Can I have blight up under economic development?
Okay? Sure.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, I see. You've got them right here. Rank the top 5, rank the top 3. Yep, got it. Okay. Okay. Any else on that? Dennis, anything on that one? That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Number 9, reports and discussion by mayor and council members. The mayor would like to have a discussion with Paul Camping. Paul, Blight Committee. I've run this by several citizens in Caribou, and one of the common questions I'm getting is, how do I reconcile my libertarian views with a government coming in telling me that I have to clean up my lawn? Isn't my lawn my property and I can do whatever I want with it?
That is not actually a libertarian viewpoint.
Correct. How do I figure it out? Right.
In anticipation of this question, I've done a little research. The key concepts for libertarian philosophy, they respect the dignity of the individual and individual rights to life, liberty, and property ownership. They like an ordered society with limited government. And in our particular case, the city of Caribou, in their effort to minimize blight, they would endorse and embrace the rule of law. Property ownership in Maine comes with abundant responsibilities. We have to obey zoning and land use regulations, city code, and we have to pay our taxes. And in return for the taxes, we receive services like public safety measures and snow plowing. But there's more. In a system of taxation where the amount we pay is based on the value of what we own, which, by the way, is determined by the city's assessment department, there is an obligation for the city to protect the value of that property. And the ways we do that are through zoning and land use regulations and minimizing blight. So I don't see where there's a conflict. Mowing a lawn is a low-level blight issue. But the city is looking at all blight issues. And everybody who follows city code, state law, and the constitutions benefits by increasing or maintaining property values.
Thank you, Paul. Good answer.
Any questions?
Thanks. You want to acknowledge that you're a libertarian?
I'm good. That's a good explanation.
Any other council members have any? Doug?
You know it. Two things. One, I'd like to bring up the television debacle that we've been trying to deal with and see if we can get this up on the table and get it taken care of through our discussions in the past. We talked about a couple different options. Have we been able to reach out to anybody yet?
Yes. I've talked with Spectrum's probably government liaison on it, and they've put me in touch with their techs from downstate. So we're moving forward again
Okay,
to
great.
try to address it.
My second topic I'd like to bring up to the table for discussion and thought for maybe a future date we could bring it to a vote. Penny, please correct me if I'm wrong in what I'm about to state about taxation on personal property, that up to $1,000 is forgiven. You don't pay any personal property. And I would like to see a good discussion and hopefully a vote in favor of the businesses to get a $1,000 credit prior to their personal property taxes being levied against them. If we can let 1,000 go over here, we should surely be able to let 1,000 go over here on the people who are paying. That's the end of my 2 cents worth. Was that right, Penny? I gotta ask the boss first. Was I right?
I've never had to speak so much in a meeting, so thank you so much. I think what Councilor Morrell is referring to is it has always been the practice, as long as I've lived here, that I've worked here, the Board of Assessors set a policy that no new personal property account would be created if the taxable value was less than $1,000. That was the policy. We do have some personal property accounts that maybe started over 1,000, but again, with depreciation every year, are now down under 1,000. But they weren't, a new account was not created if it was less than $1,000. So when you're talking about like a new policy like that, my mind is clicking like how that conflicts with what we're charged to do, which is to value all of this personal property. And we're actually, you may have read it in your Good to Know, we're actually undertaking something new with business personal property this year that maybe more people will be getting a bill, not less. And so I don't know. I'd have to get back to you on that. But am I correct? That's what you're referring to, is
Yes,
that
what I'm
policy,
saying is
that a
that-
new account isn't created if the taxable value would be less than $1,000.
And we have, in all fairness, I'll use my business when I was here. I had an old desk that was given to me from the Northern National Bank, which saved them throwing it out, and I was taxed. There was a value to that I was taxed
Right,
on.
right.
So most businesses that are paying a fair amount of taxation, I just think that it's only fair. You know, if we're going to forgive $1,000, say I wanted to open up an office, I had $870 worth of assets, and I'm not going to get taxed on that because of the $1,000, and I'll call it rule, but whatever, then we should afford that to the businesses who do pay and pay dearly within the community.
Right. That harkens back to an Aryan statute, and I can't quote it for you. I'd have to
fair.
look it up, but that people are allowed to have $1,000 in, personal property, whether it's like a tractor to cut their grass, or maybe they cut other people's grass, for a fee or other things. So that's why they weren't, that's where that came, that was the history of it and how it was applied in Caribou. But because what you're asking kind of conflicts with state law, maybe we're better off to just send everybody a bill, even if it's for $10.
I am not
And I
encouraging that.
realize that.
I'm
I know,
saying that
yeah.
if we are affording $1,000, what I'm calling a credit, in any form or shape, then it ought to be afforded to everybody. And I am by no means, would I even vote on taxing anybody more. What I'm trying to do is level the field of what's been here and I guess you could say the rule of thumb. And if we're going to forgive up to $1,000 and it's not worth hassle chasing it, then we should give everybody that we do chase $1,000 credit and then
Yeah. So can I look into that and maybe
Yeah,
report back
yeah.
at the
Sure,
next
sure.
meeting? Some of what you're talking about with desks, just as an example that you bring up, and maybe everyone's hearing way more about assessing tonight than you want to, but a lot of times what we do is we'll send a list and says, okay, whatever you have for business personal property, when did you buy it, what did it cost? And then that original cost is depreciated down to a base of 30%, which would be the value in use. Now, when you get material that is secondhand, like you're talking to, we also have a lot of people, and this is not an exaggeration, they go to the dump and they like, oh, I'm taking my trash, but look at this desk. I can use that. I can put that in my business. We have legitimately a lot of people that they'll say that came from the dump, and my husband does it. He's probably listening to this at home, but
Too late, he heard.
but he's heard me, but that's necessity dictates that here, because everyone is really trying hard to make their pennies go as far as they can. So we do have that, and it is sometimes an issue. Even if someone has bought a very expensive desk or was given a very expensive desk in that original cost, are they getting more value from that than someone who got their desk at the dump? Those are philosophical questions, and we have to have a methodology and stick with it. And original cost depreciated to a base, things that are given to you, we use a sound value based on what other people are paying for their desk that maybe had to pay for the desk. So everyone isn't saying, I got this desk at
Yeah.
the dump. And I'm like,
the price tag.
I
hanging
saw
off it.
Office Max here 2 days ago. So County Quick
understand
Print
that.
brought you a whole load. I saw them delivering it. Because we're not going
Right.
to go call
But
people
you
liars
understand-
either. But I do.
Understand what I'm saying is that if
Yep.
we're going to do it for some, you do it for everybody.
Like Ken and I talk about with code enforcement, you can't have selective enforcement, and you can't have selective taxation. It has to be uniformly applied. Everything needs to be equitable, defensible. Yes.
Penny, is it the we that he's talking about that a lot? Is it? It's the state, isn't it?
No,
It is Caribou?
There is a statute that talks about people can have $1,000 worth of personal property that would be used for business.
In the city, or is
In
it-
this, that's a state thing.
No,
But the
okay.
city has taken that a step further
Okay.
and said, if someone is operating a business and it's for a business, not just their personal thing that they may use, some for personal, some for business, we are going to establish a policy that when we get declarations of value from businesses, We go through, we're treating it like everyone else, like I said, trying to depreciate it down to a base, maybe use the sound value for some items. At the end of the sheet, when we're looking at a taxable value, if that's less than $1,000, we're not going to open an account. And that's been here as long as I've been,
I
that I've worked here.
So the $1,000 that the state isn't that their amount too?
Well, yes, but it's in a different statute, and again, it's not really related to, it's not even, I don't think, in business personal property. It just talks about things that are exempt from taxation.
Okay.
Not necessarily in the same things that kind of deal with personal property. It's just we have different parts of the statutes that talk about things that are exempt from taxation.
Mayor,
And that,
I'm sorry. Obviously, this is a very in-depth discussion, and I think if we can bring it back another night, it would be beneficial for everybody.
Okay.
Did I answer your questions?
thank you.
Okay.
In Florida, they call it dumpster diving. When Dane, if Dana were there, he'd enjoy it. Okay. Any other council members have anything? Hearing none. Item number 10, City Manager's Report.
Councilors, I included in your packet a summary of current projects that we're bird dogging. Just so that everybody's aware, we do have a new business in town. Mr. Dana Cassidy opened up his trampoline park in the Caribou Shopping Center. It opened up just before the first of the year. And I've had communications with Christina. We'll be doing a ribbon cutting there. We have a date uncertain still, but we'll let the council know about that. And maybe you can go jump on a trampoline while you're there or something. The Skyway Plaza, just to update the council on that, I've talked with the state. The TIF district that is in place there is already at its maximum extent. And so if we wanted to help a current occupant of that building be able to have a lease that goes beyond the current TIF of that property, then the city would have to create a new TIF district at the end of this one. And so the time frame for that is still many years out, but it's something that I'll have to circle back with the owner there and have some discussions with them on how they want to handle that. Tomorrow, the State Economic Development Office is coming up to the Northern Aroostook region. They'll be meeting with NMDC tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock to talk about the economic projects in the area. In the afternoon, they'll be taking a tour of the Port facility, and I'll be following along with them on that to talk about some things that we're looking at that maybe the state can help us out with. Obviously, the blight cleanup, as I mentioned, we'll be having our first meeting tomorrow. The home on Liberty Street is down, and we're waiting for the springtime to revegetate that site. We have 5 other homes that are on the chopping block as far as getting them taken down. Bird's Eye cleanup is on hold until the snow's gone, and other work is just kind of ongoing with the Hilltop, and we're getting ready to pick up the Title 13 as we start getting the EMS contracts and all these other meetings off the plate. But we know that the blight, I would say that the planning board meeting that was held last week, the planning board members are also very anxious to look at this blight issue and incorporate some of that as new goals into the general plan. And we've also invited them to attend the blight meeting tomorrow so they can be in at the ground floor on what this committee is able to put together and start working on things. 60 Access Highway, I do have some information I would like to share with the council in executive session tonight with regards to the tenancies or the tenants that are there. As far as other administrative projects that are going on, by charter, we need to put together a final expense budget narrative report, so that will be a big focus the rest of this month. Union negotiations, waiting to hear back from the police officer union on one of their terms, and Public Works negotiations have stalled, and indication is that we may be going to mediation on that one. So we're waiting to get a formal declaration for them on that. The fire EMS structural study, we had a kickoff meeting last week on that. Yeah, we met with Jan Murchison with Sewell Engineering and had a good discussion. I appreciated the counselors that were there and participated in the discussion. Right now, the indication is that they'll put together some options that were discussed and bring that back to us with some real rough cost estimates and basic strings that might be attached to that. And the design will take place this spring. Ideally, we'll have it out to bid the first part of June, with construction on the repairs beginning in July, and hopefully having everything buttoned up by the end of summer or the first part of fall. Cable franchise agreement. Reached back out to them again, make mention in here that we've talked about the PEG channel and getting that looked at. Their indication is that, again, that 5% maximum that we can charge them for their services. One of the emails I got back was a little cryptic in that the indication was the PEG channel, they may not count that in the 5% cost because they simply put the cost of the PEG channel on the residents of the city. And so it's not really a cost to them to provide the PEG channel, but it is obviously a cost to our residents. And I've asked them to provide numbers to me on the cost of the PEG channel so that we can know what that is, as well as the cost. The current franchise agreement includes that they will provide cable services to multiple public buildings, including the school district, the multiple buildings in the school district and the city buildings. And those costs for providing that service would count against that 5%. They've said that they will get me a cost so we can know what may be deducted from our future franchise fees that we've been getting in order to have those services provided. I think those are the major projects we're looking at. I don't know if you have any questions on the other items that are up there, but the report is available for public as well in a packet.
You?
Can we put the wage and classification policy on the next agenda?
We can.
Thank you.
Anything?
Doug? Dennis, back on the discussion, shouldn't the school be taking care of their own cable needs and negotiations? And let me ask this, what benefit is it for us to be doing that? I know it's all going to come out of one pot, being the taxpayer on one end or the other, but
Right.
I guess that's kind of my shtick is, why are we involved if we have no say over the school? And, they should be doing their own negotiating, in my opinion, anyway.
At the time of the franchise agreement, back in the 90s, the school district was the city. And
It isn't now.
It's not now, granted. With these franchise agreements, the city, we are the negotiators at the table, and we hold the cards as far as their use of the right-of-way. And part of this, like earlier, we talked about how the city has an agreement with CUD to help reduce costs or to make that quasi-government entity whole. It's an opportunity for the city to also help reduce some of the costs to the taxpayers on behalf of the school district. But I understand where you're coming from, that if they want to negotiate something differently, we can certainly let them do that.
I think that's a discussion for another night, because that's going to get pretty gosh darn deep in my mind.
Yeah. Okay, hey, it was a question.
Well, let's put it on the agenda, just for discussion.
Absolutely.
Not that an action's necessarily going to be taken, but let's start talking about it. And, let's put a 15-minute deal on it. Just see what's going to happen there. Any other questions on this deal? on the report from the manager? Okay. Number 11, reports by staff and appointed officials. Jane?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. Dennis? Know anybody? No?
I'm sorry, I do. The council asked that we set up a ribbon cutting with the county ag, and Christina has reached out to them. We're looking at either the 14th or 15th of this week. It was just a council for discussion, which days work best for you, because county ag said they were available.
What time?
4:30
In the afternoon?
in the afternoon. Any day's okay for me.
Good for me.
Doesn't matter.
Do it tomorrow. Tomorrow's 14th.
Tomorrow is the 14th.
Do it Wednesday, it doesn't matter.
Okay, let's wrap it up. 14th.
14th,
14th.
tomorrow?
Tomorrow. Please.
At 4:30?
4:30.
Okay, we'll get back to them first thing in the morning.
Okay. Okay, number 12, executive session. Chair will entertain a motion to go into executive session to talk about an economic development issue, 405.6.
So moved.
Second.
Before we do, okay, all those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much and have a great evening.